Hey, this is Sandy Cormack. I prepared this video to walk you through the DISC Plus personality assessment. We're going to learn about how the assessment works, what it measures, the dimensions of the DISC and the values index, and then how to apply it to a managerial type role. And what I've got here is an actual DISC Plus report. Once you take the DISC Plus, the system sends you a link to download your results. So if you've already taken it, you should have received the link to download your results. Once you get that link, click on it and you'll download a PDF form just like this. And when you get it, there's a title page, and then there's an executive summary that shows you your results for the DISC profile and the values index. So the first 3 pages are the executive summary. And we're not going to spend any time on that now because the report has a section for each one of these, and that's what we're going to focus on today. The first part of the profile report looks at the DISC, and the DISC measures how you behave, your behaviors. And your behaviors are very important as a function of the things that people see in you first. So they might not know anything else about you, but they will notice how you behave. So it's very important to be aware of this because this is how people make first impressions of you. And the summary for the DISC is found on page 5 of your report. It shows you a scale here of 0 to 100 and your score along that continuum of 0 to 100. But where I want to start is by explaining the actual DISC dimensions, the actual DISC theory. And that essentially looks at your behavior along 4 dimensions. The D stands for decisive, the I stands for interactive, the S stands for stabilizing, and the C stands for cautious. So when we talk about your DISC score, we're looking at those 4 behaviors. And I like to walk people through this table here, which is on page 8, I believe. Yeah, page 8. This is sort of the DISC cheat sheet that explains to you sort of how your score relates to specific behaviors. So I'm going to go through the 4 dimensions one at a time and explain them. The first dimension is decisive. Decisive looks at how you tend to approach problems and make decisions. So this is your decision-making behavior. That's why the D stands for decisive. Okay, so imagine that you are faced with a problem and you react to that problem. You decide, what am I going to do about this problem? Well, if you have a high D score, it means that you tend to be very driving and forceful and daring when it comes to solving problems. In other words, you attack the problem very vigorously and you immediately come up with a solution because that problem is something that is standing in your way. You want to get around it. So you want to make a decision really fast and you want to get around that problem or plow through that problem. And so you tend to behave in a very decisive way. You say, this is what we need to do, and here's how we're going to deal with it, and let's get to it. Boom, boom, boom. No delay. If you have a lower D score, look at the words associated with that: more inquisitive, conservative, mild, agreeable, and deliberate. What you're going to want to do when you're confronted with a problem is step back for a minute and examine the problem. What is it about this problem? What's the root cause of the problem? What do we need to do to solve this problem? Maybe I need to collect some facts and data. Maybe I need to talk to some people. And it's not until you understand the problem at a very detailed level that you're going to want to make that decision, that you're going to want to make that recommendation. So you're more contemplative. The problem itself you don't view necessarily as a huge obstacle that's going to drive you to get excited. You're going to take your time. You're going to examine the problem before you set forth a decision or a recommendation to solve it. So that's essentially the range here. You can see when we look at your scores, you can take a look at the words that are sort of around the same area as your score, and you can relate those to you. Now we're going to look at interactive. That's the I score. This looks at people, how you tend to interact with others and share opinions. So think of yourself as being in a meeting with a lot of other people. If you have a high I score, you tend to express yourself more gregariously, persuasively, inspiring, and enthusiastic. So you're going to be a little more extroverted. You might be the first one to talk. You might make small talk before the meeting. When you're in the meeting, you might lead the discussion. You might have a whole lot to say about it. But if you have a lower I score, you're more reflective, matter of fact, and reserved. You're going to be the one who listens. You're going to listen to other people talk. You might wait for 3 or 4 people to talk before you feel comfortable saying anything, because you're listening and taking in what other people are saying before you want to say anything. You might not say anything at all. You might leave the meeting, go back to your desk and take things in, and then maybe write an email about it. So essentially what we're looking at is the difference between extroversion and introversion. More outspoken, more the first to speak versus the last to speak. So that's the interactive scale. Stabilizing looks at 3 things, essentially. First of all, we associate it with pace, how you tend to pace things in your environment. So if you have a high S score, you tend to be more patient, predictable, passive, and complacent. So what does this mean? It means you like things at a slower pace, okay? You like to have things going at a very reasonable, slower pace, not driving you, allowing you to sort of take your time and do things. It also looks at how you behave in a team environment. People with a high S score tend to like being on a team and working with people who they trust in a very low conflict environment. In other words, high harmony. We want to get along. I want to get along with my teammates and work with them closely and get along with them in a very harmonious environment. If you have a low S score, restless, active, chaotic, spontaneous, you're more comfortable with a fast-paced environment. You're more comfortable not being on a team. You're more comfortable being in a high conflict environment, okay? So you're not going to want to be the team player. You might want to be the solo person who's out on their own, doing things on their own, doing things for themselves. And you don't care if what you do creates conflict. You might enjoy a high conflict environment. And you like to move things at a very fast pace. So that's the difference between the high S and the low S scores. And then the last dimension here is cautious. Cautious essentially looks at your preference for established protocols and standards. So how procedural are you? The high Cs are cautious, perfectionist, systematic, and careful. They tend to be very highly procedural, very precise, focus on quality, focus on accuracy, focus on precision. The lower C scores, independent, rebellious, careless, and challenging, don't like to have a lot of procedures and rules to follow. They are more independent. They're more open to dynamic change in their environment, in what's happening. I like to describe this as the difference between the high C accountant and the low C mountain climber. It's just a very different behavioral mindset approaching plans and procedures and related things. So that's an overview of the 4 dimensions. So now we can go to what I call the kite chart here, which takes a look at all 4 of them. This is on page 9 of your report. Takes a look at all 4 of them at the same time, because if you look at them together like this, you can get an additional 2 behaviors out of it. One of them, if you look at the very top, it says extrovert and the bottom says introvert. So what we're looking at here is, sorry about that, what we're looking at here is sort of the difference between more outgoing and more inwardly focused people. And you see that if you have a high D and a high I, it pulls you more towards extroversion. If you have a high C and a high S, it pushes you towards more introversion. And so this person, they have a high I and a high S. And because of this, they have aspects of both. So it might be that in a certain setting, maybe when they're with people they trust, they tend to be more extroverted, but maybe when they're with strangers, they tend to be more introverted. And it all depends on, how they manage themselves. And this would be sort of a topic of our discussion if we were going over this one-on-one. You also see that if you have high D and high C, you tend to be more task-oriented. If you have high I and high S, you tend to be more people-oriented. So this person is a more people-oriented person. Probably really enjoys being in that, working with people, doing things with people. She might be in customer service or something like that, where she's interacting with people all the time. So you're essentially getting the benefit of 2 additional behaviors on this page 9 kite chart. So let's move now to the next 4 pages, 10, 11, 12, and 13. And I want to focus on the bottom of each one of those pages. What you see is an explanation of your individual dimension scores. So this person has a score of 49. And there's a group of bullets down here that say, here are some trait-specific items to consider for a person who has scores like that. And so in this case, it says sometimes you demand too much of yourself. You think it's important to have some time to evaluate options before acting. You are quite self-critical of yourself and demand a lot out of yourself. You prefer a culture that allows ample time for analysis of new ideas before implementation takes place. You'd like to think things through before acting, and you can be very modest in dealing with others. What I recommend that people do is they go through each one of these 4 pages and highlight the bullets that are especially applicable to them, the ones that you connect with. So if this was your score, you might say, hey, yeah, you know what? I do tend to be self-critical. I want to highlight that. I do like to think ideas through before acting. I want to highlight that. I want to have ample time for analysis of new ideas. So I want to highlight that. It enables you to take that score, that unique score, and make it apply to you, in a way that you really connect with. And there's 1 page for each one of the dimensions. So do that for every one of these pages, all 4 of these. Go through and highlight the bullets, okay, that apply to you. So here are the bullets for the I, here are the bullets for the S, and then here are the bullets for the C. So when you're done, you now have a really good set of behavioral traits associated with you. You might find that some of these bullets don't apply to you. You might say, well, this doesn't, this bullet here, this really doesn't apply to me. I don't really think that's me. And that's because we're looking at these behaviors on an island, isolated. When you put all 4 of the behaviors together, they tend to push against one another. So something in this person's I score might be overriding a trait that comes from the S score in such a way that it really downplays it. So don't worry if all of these don't apply to you. So then on page 14, we bring all four of them together. And these are a set of statements that describe you based on other people who score the same as you. So this person with their unique pattern persuades others by offering empathy, understanding, and friendship, has sincere interest in both internal and external stakeholders on a project, a high service orientation, even as a leader, good organizational skills in building complex processes. Again, highlight these. And if I were you, I would highlight them and maybe copy and paste them into another document, because these are things that we're going to start associating with your personal strengths, the strengths that you will bring with you when you decide whether or not you want to become a supervisor. You're going to take some of these with you and you're going to say, these are going to really help me to be a great supervisor. So now let's go down to page 16. This is a good, the ideas for being more effective page is a good summary of things that might be some of your blind spots. Look through these, highlight these, and see if these are things that you can connect with. Do you need to be more practical and less ideological? Do you need to generate a greater sense of urgency to get things done now? These might be some real blind spots for you that could impact your ability to be an effective supervisor. So look through these and see which of these do you really feel like that you connect with, that really stand out for you. I'm going to skip down here to strength-based insights, which is on page 18. Strength-based insights is another way of looking at the strengths that come from your behavioral profile. So take a look at some of the strengths that come out of this person's unique combination of scores. Has a rare ability of being able to calm people who are angry or upset. Is able to reduce group tension with a quip or turning a phrase. Able to meet new people with poise and confidence. Solves problems with people in mind. Has a large network of contacts with both internal and external stakeholders. Approach to the job is systematic, deliberate, and persistent in developing processes or finding solutions and keeping others optimistically involved in the process. So there are some really good strengths in this list that would carry over to being an effective supervisor. Again, go through this, highlight the ones that you really connect with, and especially the ones that you think would help you if you decide to become a supervisor. Ideal job climate. This is a very powerful sheet because especially if you are looking for a new position, ideal job climate is the thing that people don't understand about themselves, yet is something that is really essential to understand when you're interviewing for a new job, because you want to move into a job climate that is aligns with your strengths. Because if you don't, it's like swimming in dirty water. You don't want to do that. You want clean water, and a clean, effective, supporting environment is what you want. So what this is telling us here for this person is these are the things that they need to be successful. This is the job climate that they need to work in. This is their ideal work environment. And if you look through some of these, you can see, hey, I need to find these things out about the place that I'm interviewing with before I make a decision. I need to ask questions during the interview. I need to understand this about the work environment and about myself so that I know that we're a good fit. Also, think about this as is related to your management team. If you decide to become a supervisor, you're going to be working with a lot of other supervisors and you're going to be creating a job climate. So you're going to want to know this about the people on your team. you're going to want to have the people on your team take this assessment and then take a look at their ideal job climate and see, is this the kind of job climate I'm creating for them? The things that I need to be providing so that they can be successful. Okay, let's move on. Here are some areas for continual improvement. Page 20. So again, this focuses more on blind spots. So due to your behavioral style, you may tend to be overly focused on being liked, be overly optimistic in judging the ability of others, being overly optimistic in the ability to persuade or manage others. These are some things that you want to understand about yourself as you move into that supervisor role. Because if these are blind spots for you, it's things that you need to work on, things that you need to learn how to manage in order to be successful as a supervisor. Here's your preferred training and learning style on page 21. Communication insights for others. This is the only page in the report that is designed for you to give to other people. In other words, you want other people to communicate with you in a certain way in order to be effective. So here's a list of things for them to do when they communicate with you, and a list of things to avoid doing when they communicate with you. Think about if you had a team of people, if you were supervising a team of people and you had a page for each one of them like this, what sort of power would that give you? You would be able to craft a communication strategy to meet the needs of each one of the people on your team. If you had this for your boss, you would be able to craft a communication strategy to communicate with your boss effectively in every interaction. It's not something you'd learn overnight. It's something you'd have to practice, but this is an essential first step in understanding that. So this is a very powerful, very useful page, page 22. And then the next few pages here, down to page 25, are essentially a self-assessment in order to determine for you how relevant your behaviors are in your life, in your career. It gives you an opportunity here to express how each of the dimensions are relevant: your natural style, your adaptive style, your strength-based insights, your communication do's and don'ts, your ideal job climate. So, and I recommend that everybody answer these questions, especially this page here about supporting and limiting your success. Go through here and answer this as it pertains to you making the transition to a supervisor. How can your unique behavioral style support your success as a supervisor? How can it limit your success or get in the way of your success as a supervisor? These are really important insights for you to have. So I recommend that you print those pages out and go through and answer all those questions. And then when we have our conversation, this would be something for us to explore. Now we're going to move to the values index. The values index looks at your motivators. So if your DISC looked at your behaviors, that shows you how you do things. The values index shows you why you do things. So this is very powerful. It looks at the things that motivate you. It looks at the things you're passionate about. And this is going to be very important because during our conversation, we're going to explore, what is your why? Why do you really want to be a supervisor? And we're going to start our exploration of this by going down to page 29, which looks at the 7 dimensions. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about these 7 dimensions. The aesthetic dimension is the first value that we look at, the first motivator that we look at. And this is the drive for form, harmony, beauty, and balance. The thing that people connect with most with this aesthetic dimension is work-life balance. People with a high aesthetic score tend to want to keep a very distinct work-life balance. They go to work, they work all day, when it's quitting time, they go home and they don't think about work again to the next day, because their time at home away from work is very valuable to them. People with a low aesthetic score might think about work 24/7. Like you can think of some careers where that would be a benefit, like say a salesperson, thinking about sales 24/7. You wouldn't expect them to have a very high aesthetic score. But we associate this particular motivation with careers like interior designer, artist, musician, architect, things like that, things where there's design and form and function and creating a sense of balance, like feng shui. A lot of times I will see people with a high aesthetic be involved in real creative type occupations, a place where their creativity is in strong demand. The second value is the economic drive. That's the drive for money, practical results, and return on investment. People people with this motivator will often find themselves in a career that makes them a lot of money, or a career in which they're working with money. So like a financial advisor might have a very strong economic drive. An entrepreneur, a CEO, a doctor, like a specialist, a surgeon. We see that they concern themselves a lot with things like return on investment and cost benefits analysis and stuff. So just the idea of working with money and determining rate of return and stuff like that is something that really motivates them. If you want to reward somebody with a high economic drive, give them a bonus, give them a financial bonus, or maybe give them stock options or something like that, something that will reward them economically. Now we look at the third dimension, which is individualistic. This is the drive for independence and uniqueness. In other words, you want to do things your way. You want to do things in a way that works for you. It tends to be extremely important to you to value that independence, because it's part of your personal brand. You want to be known as the expert who does things in a certain way. You want to be recognized for being an expert, and it contributes to your uniqueness. Somebody who's really highly individualistic cannot work for a micromanager. It totally deadens their creativity. It totally deadens their will to succeed. They will often get out of that situation as quickly as possible, because they want to work for somebody who gives them the room and the leeway to do things their way. Just say, this is the outcome that I want, you go run with it. Think about somebody who's got maybe a low individualistic score, who wants to be told, just tell me how you want it done and I'll do it that way. Okay, you're going to encounter people who are on both ends of the spectrum, all along the spectrum on that. And you're going to need to know, what is it that I need to do to inspire this person to work if you're their supervisor? What sort of job climate do I need to give to the high individualist versus the low individualist? The fourth dimension is political. This is the drive for control, power, and influence. So the person with the high political drive wants to be in charge. The buck stops here. They're driven to lead. They tend to be a lot more competitive. They really want to get into management as quickly as possible. Some people with the high political drive just want to manage things like projects or programs or things like that. But others mostly want to manage people. And they really like the prestige that comes with that authority and that responsibility. So if you want to reward somebody with high political, you give them more responsibility, you give them that promotion, you give them that corner office, you give them that executive parking space, so that people know that they have a lot of power and influence. The fifth dimension is altruistic. Altruistic is the drive to help others, to put others' needs before your own. So, you would expect nurses and teachers and maybe police and firefighters to have a very high altruistic drive to put others' needs ahead of their own needs. Taking care of the safety of others, taking care of the health of others. My mother is a nurse and she has a very strong altruistic drive. The watch out that I have for the altruistic people are, do you put others' needs ahead of your own to the extent that you neglect your own needs? So that person often needs to learn how to balance taking care of others with taking care of themselves. The sixth value is regulatory. This is the drive to be in a structured environment with order and routine. So lots of rules, lots of regulations, lots of procedures. Often this person, if they were put into an environment that doesn't have a lot of structure, will build the structure themselves in order to make it so that they can function. They really like having that structure to rely on. When it comes time to make changes, they want to tighten the structure. They want to make the structure more efficient, more effective. They really don't want to tear down the structure that's there. And the last dimension is theoretical. Theoretical is the drive to learn, to acquire knowledge and understanding. So we find a lot of analytically minded people, a lot of like PhDs, researchers, things of that nature. The person with the high theoretical will attack problems by first understanding the problem, researching the problem, and analyzing the problem. The lookout for the high theoretical is doing analysis for analysis sake, paralysis by analysis, because sometimes you have to stop your analysis and move forward. Sometimes people with high theoretical want to keep analyzing, want to keep collecting data and analyzing data. Sometimes you got to stop and move on. So that's an overview of the 7 dimensions. And the report is just like the DISC report, except for the this square here, or this rectangle that has a line in the middle that says norm. So what this means is this norm line in each one of these rectangles represents the average score for everyone who has ever taken this. And the box here around that norm represents 1 standard deviation. It says 1 SD here. So what this is telling you is 68% of the people who have ever taken this assessment have scores that fall inside of this box. So when we talk about high and low scores, we're looking at the score above and below that box. So this person has high scores in aesthetic, altruist, and then they have scores inside the box for everything else. And on their executive summary, it has a short explanation for each one of them. The chart on page 31, I've never really come up with a great use for, but you can look at it as a way of depicting the same thing that you just saw on this chart, except it's in more of a visual manner. It's sort of like that kite chart, but it really doesn't tell you a whole lot more than this does. So whichever one you prefer. And then for the values index does not bring the scores together the way the DISC does. It gives you 3 pages for each one of the dimensions. And it looks at 5 things for each one. It looks at the general traits associated with it. So this is the aesthetic dimension for this person. It has bullets to describe the general traits associated with it, the key strengths that come from it, the motivational insights, the training and learning insights, and then the continual improvement insights. And it does this for each one of the 7 dimensions. So I'm not going to go through each one of these other than to say, what I recommend that you do is to go through these and highlight again the ones that really apply to you. Okay. To look at the things that you bring to the table, your strengths that come from your values, and then also maybe some blind spots that come from maybe your continual improvement insights. And think of how they would apply to you as you decide to move forward as a supervisor. And then come down here, go through each one of the pages like that. This takes us through regulatory, theoretical, and then again, there's a relevance section. So look at your number 1 and number 2 motivators, the ones that you have the 2 highest scores for, and look at how well they align with your either your current role or your role as a supervisor. In other words, how will they enable you to be successful? And you're looking for a score from 8 to 10 to be a really, really good fit, a really, really good alignment. And again, how well do your motivators and drivers help support your success? And how can they help not support your success? And use the role as a supervisor for your insights as you're doing this. And that brings us to the end. So prior to us getting together, I'd like you to go through this, complete the relevance section for both the DISC and the values. And we will use that as a means for sort of driving our discussion moving forward. And I really look forward to seeing you in our one-on-one, and we together will lay out a path for you to achieve your goal of being a supervisor. So talk to you soon.